Story 1. I was at a high school party in a garage. I stepped outside to use the restroom when the police arrived. I ran down the street and hid in some bushes. A friend who wasn't drinking came and picked me and two others who managed to escape. Just a couple of minutes down the road, we were pulled over. The officers clearly knew we had come from the party. They got us out of the car and conducted sobriety tests. None of us who had been drinking passed, but the driver did. The officer looked at us and said he knew we were at the party and had been drinking, but he let us go because he respected that we had a sober driver. Story 2. Not the first time. Thankfully, my friends in high school were a lot slower than I was. We were out past curfew, just being typical teenagers. Story 3. My first experience running was when I was 17. My 15-year-old brother and I were walking around at around 3 in the morning, smoking cigarettes and talking. I saw a police car down a street we had just left, next to a gas station. I told my brother, "When that bus gets between us and the car, start running." He thought I was joking until the police officer turned onto the road behind us and activated his lights. I was already at full speed at that point, while my brother was lightly jogging until the lights came on. We cut through someone's yard with many trees, forcing the officer to leave his car and chase us on foot. We both got away clean, even though we had not broken any laws. The police actually showed up at my dad's house because my brother was known to be trouble in the area. Turned out that two individuals had been breaking into vehicles near that store, and they had seen us walking and assumed it was us. Keep in mind that we never admitted we were the ones they chased. Story 4. A police officer outside my high school stopped my brother and me for jaywalking while we were trying to get to class on time. He was writing us both tickets for over $200 each, and I panicked and ran. I had already given him my ID. He pulled me out of class about 30 minutes later and finished giving me my ticket. Story 5. I was 17 and legally allowed to drive my friends around. We went to a cul-de-sac in my town where there were many fancy houses. We parked far away and walked so we didn't block anyone's way, thinking we were being respectful. There was one house that was fully finished but never sold. It was there collecting dust. We went down to the pool to smoke. It was late at night when we saw the police lights and bolted. Officers were chasing us while we tried to run down a steep hill, but we ended up rolling down it. We found a little trail covered in trees and bushes. We ran down it and it led us to my car. We all jumped in and drove off. They never found us. Thank goodness we were all athletic in high school. Story 6. I used to play capture the flag in Boy Scouts, so I knew how to shake people and sprint through the woods without a flashlight. In high school, I was chased by a police officer. They always expect people to take the easiest path downhill and hide like a cornered rabbit. I chose the steepest embankment I could find, because police officers are often lazy. I scrambled up that hillside like a spider monkey and ran through people's yards. I knew that town like the back of my hand. I could see police cars prowling the valley with spotlights while I paused to catch my breath. Story 7. It was a game of manhunt at my college. 20 runners started in the quad and had to flee to the parking lot exit that had been designated as safe. 40 campus police officers were spread throughout the quad, sidewalks, and buildings leading towards safety. When the match started, most of the runners sprinted toward the safe zone, usually trying to evade the officers. I ran the other way, taking a different exit to leave the campus entirely. I then walked through the suburban neighborhood beside the college to avoid being spotted and doubled back to the safe zone from across the street. The most stressful part was that the other runners had already been apprehended when I was using the crosswalk back to the college. Several officers were guarding the safe zone while the rest were sweeping the campus buildings, looking for me. I only made it to safety because the officers were watching the campus parking lot. In that first match, I was the only runner who made it to safety. This feat was not repeated in the following matches because at least one officer would watch the crosswalk from outside the campus. Story 8. Not the first time. We were smart and fast about it. Our whole group escaped. There was only one other time police came for the group I was with, and they did catch me for the simple reason that I did not run. I hadn't done anything wrong, except socialize with the wrong people, which is not a criminal or civil offense. This was clearly captured on closed-circuit television. I knew this prior to letting myself be caught. Both times were because of fights in bars. The first time was not our group's fault, but we were in a foreign country and knew the police would not side with us. The second time was absolutely my group's fault. In my defense, I only knew one person before that night, and we weren't particularly close. He asked me if I wanted to join for a party, and having recently gone through a breakup, I needed the distraction, so I gladly accepted. After getting drunk, they were actively looking to fight with others, which eventually happened. A big brawl ensued in the bar, with several people getting mildly injured and a lot of property damage. Everything was captured by closed-circuit television, and I pointed out that information at the police station. They checked it, saw that I had remained quietly behind the bar with the bartender during the fight while waiting for the police to arrive. They took my statement and let me go. Story 9. I was street racing in my 2017 BMW i8 with no license plates, extremely tinted windows, and a helmet. I was going over 130 miles per hour on the freeway, swerving around cars like a cheetah chasing a gazelle. Minutes later, I saw flashing lights and heard sirens. I pulled over to the shoulder, but as an officer approached, I sped off like a startled deer. 5 police cars began to chase me, and a couple of helicopters had their spotlights shining on my vehicle. As I drove further, my vehicle started to run out of fuel, and I stopped in the middle of a neighborhood. I spent 3 years in federal prison with no chance of parole and was released in late 2020. Story 10. The first time I ran from the police, I took my quad off-road into some rough terrain where their car couldn't follow. They didn't catch me that day. Story 11. I was following my friend and thought we were in a 2-story apartment. We were not. I landed perfectly, right between my legs, on the railing, then rolled and fell onto the grass. Luckily for me, I am female, but I was bruised for 2 months or more. We got away, though. Story 12. The getaway car driver helped a friend retrieve her dog from her abusive ex. The police were called after he caught her on camera, but fortunately we did not get caught. I don't know how, but we didn't. Story 13. As a teenager, I was caught several times smoking marijuana and drinking underage in public places. However, I was never arrested and was only given a warning. I did not attempt to run, and I believe they appreciated that they did not have to chase me. Story 14. We, a group of 6 or 7 teenagers around 16 years old, went to a different high school than the one with a nice basketball court. We decided to play there. What we didn't know was that there was a small trailer behind the court, which nobody knew about, and it had lights on. It was dusk, and we thought no one lived there, so we started playing. Suddenly, a plainclothes officer approached us and said, "Hey, you're trespassing." One of the guys in our group responded angrily, and the officer went back inside the trailer. About 10 minutes later, we saw blue lights from behind the trailer, and the officer was driving a cruiser towards us. We all scattered to our different vehicles, but I happened to be with the slowest one. You know the saying about zombies? You don't have to be the fastest, just not the slowest? The same applies to police. The driver tried to turn off his lights and duck into a few side roads, but we eventually got pulled over. It became chaotic when the officer started questioning the driver. He was angry, and we were still under the influence, saying things like, "Hey man, it's public property," and we obviously disturbed him. Ultimately, we ended up in jail overnight for disorderly conduct and received 50 hours of community service. I would recommend experiencing this once before turning 18, but only once. Story 15. Walking through Bachelor's Grove Cemetery after hours. It is said to be one of the most haunted places in Illinois and also a forest preserve. A group of about 10 of us encountered a smaller group of children doing the same thing. The large crowd of kids drew attention, and when the police arrived, everyone started to run except for the boy in the front of the line. He raised his arms and prevented us from escaping. As a result, we all received tickets and completed our community service. Story 16. I climbed up to the roof of a small plaza in my hometown with a couple of friends. It was easy enough to shimmy up a pipe. We were just messing around and getting high when we saw the police car pull up. The officer who got out was easily 50 pounds overweight and tried his best to shout us down. He finally decided to climb up himself, got winded because he was so out of shape, and ended up hanging onto the edge of the roof, unable to pull himself up. My friends and I grabbed his arms and helped him up the rest of the way. Then, when he was trying to catch his breath, we all slid down the pipe and took off while he yelled at us to stay off. I have no idea how he ever got down, but he definitely didn't catch us. Story 17. My friends threw snowballs at semi-trucks even though I told them not to. A truck driver stopped and chased after us with a bat. We all separated. I ran the wrong way for an hour, then cut through town and went up a main road. As soon as I saw lights coming down the road a couple of kilometers away, I knew it was the police. I went into the ditch and hid, but they had an officer hiding in the ditch on their end. We had a standoff for hours, and just as I was giving up because I was about to get frostbite, he had his partner come pick him up. As they drove by, they yelled at me that I was lucky because he was going to beat me up and then take me to jail. Story 18. After my grandfather passed away, we learned he had run from the police. This would have been in the 1950s or 1960s, putting him in his 30s, since he was in the Navy at the time. He was on his motorcycle when a police officer tried to pull him over, so my grandfather took off and went into the military base because he knew the personnel there wouldn't report him. He managed to get away with it, and we had no idea he had done this until after he died. Story 19. My friends and I got caught smoking marijuana behind a fence by the canal. We took off running and reached the car, speeding out of town as quickly as we could. We never got caught. Story 20. My friends and I sneaked out as teenagers. We saw a police officer make a U-turn, so we ran behind some houses to a road and made it to a large drainage ditch with a road above it. We hid under the overpass. It was a fun experience as a kid. Story 21. I ran 2 blocks through backyards until the clothesline caught me at the neck. The officer asked why I ran. I said my friends told me to. There was no alcohol on us and we were not in a car, so they let us go. Story 22. Jumping the fence at the pool after midnight for skinny dipping with friends. The police came multiple times, but we were never caught. Story 23. I ran away from a high school party when the police arrived. I doubt they even chased me, but I was quick to leave and didn't look back. I ran across a field, reached a wire fence, grabbed it, and attempted to jump over it. It was an electric fence. Story 24. I hid under a hedge while they passed by. They didn't see me. Just typical teenage experiences, nothing major, but still significant. Story 25. I took a pack of Pokemon cards, and my mom called mall security. They were relaxed. The second time, I was hiding an undocumented immigrant in my basement from my parents and siblings, and it nearly made national news. Story 26. In the 1970s, I was selling drugs in a bathroom at a Led Zeppelin concert at Madison Square Garden. A janitor was in there and wanted to buy a joint, but he did not look like the type, so I started walking away. It turned out he was an undercover police officer. He and his partner confronted me, told me I was under arrest, and started walking me away down the packed corridor of concertgoers. For some reason, they didn't handcuff me. They just walked on each side of me, holding my arms. I gave a quick shrug to get their arms off me and started running and screaming, "The police are after me! Stop the police!" It worked. I made it to my seat and hid until the lights went off and the concert started. I was a foolish teenager, but I never sold drugs at a concert again. However, at another concert later that summer, I saw the same undercover police officer working the bathrooms. Story 27. We entered private property thinking it was abandoned. The plan was to break some windows and do graffiti. Suddenly, we saw lights and heard a man shouting, so we ran across the entire area and escaped the way we had come in. It was a thrill. Story 28. I was probably about 12 when we got someone to buy us a couple of quarts of beer. We were just about to take a drink at a construction site when the police showed up. We ran through the woods, and there was an officer on my heels, but we outran them and hid in the woods. Then we cut through backyards to get home. Story 29. The first time I ran, I was skateboarding in a closed school. They somehow got onto the campus and chased us down. I ran, jumped the fence, and rushed to a friend's house. The last time I ran from the police, I got caught and spent 6 months in jail. Story 30. We threw paintballs at cars and then had to navigate our way out of a gated community. Similar to Sam Fisher, while the police and neighborhood watch searched. This was around 2005 when I was 14. Story 31. I remember the first time I was speeding down the road without a license in a car filled with drugs. I accelerated to catch a yellow light, and when I entered the intersection, I spotted a police officer on the side. Realizing he would pursue me, I continued to speed up, and fortunately, there was a hill that obstructed his view. After I crested the hill, I quickly turned into a parking lot and jumped out, just in time to see him drive past with his sirens blaring. I wasn't very smart at 19. Story 32. I ran away from home at 14 because of the abuse, and the police never listened. I have tried a few more times since then, and now at 16, I still struggle with wanting to end my life and harbor resentment towards law enforcement. Story 33. I may have run from the police on my motorcycle in my early days. I passed several police cars on a two-way road while riding with friends. I wasn't speeding or anything, but when I checked my mirror, I saw them making abrupt U-turns. I accelerated to the red light and moved to the front of the traffic. When the light turned green, I made a left onto the highway and headed toward the county line. I literally ran out of fear because why would they pursue us when we did nothing? Not today. Story 34. I ran for about 2 to 3 minutes through my neighborhood. Then the police officer finally caught up to me and tagged me, so I chased him. Story 35. A friend called an ambulance for me because I tried to take my own life the day before. I tried running from them, and yes, I got caught. I spent 2 weeks in psychiatric care. It took 2 officers and an emergency medical technician to restrain me. Story 36. Not a police officer, but a campus security guard. I was smoking on campus while walking to the bus stop to go home when a security guard on a Segway yelled at me to stop so they could ticket me. I noticed I was standing next to some stairs, so I casually walked up the stairs and looked at them while puffing on my cigarette. They told me to come down, but I said no. They refused to get off their Segway and started going to the opposite side for the disability ramp. I just walked away and caught the bus. They never figured out who I was. Story 37. When I was much younger in the 1980s, we were out at night without much to do when a police officer decided we were up to no good. We ran into an orchard, and when he shined the spotlight into the area, we dropped into the tall grass. The light moved away from our location, allowing us to escape the beam of the spotlight. We made it home, and that's about it. Story 38. My 16th birthday party in Boulder in 1996 was chaotic. My friend's parents were out of town. We all took acid, played music loudly, and hung out in the front yard. Then the police arrived, and my friends and I jumped the backyard fence into another yard, feeling high, and went into an open shed where we stayed for about 3 hours, trying to be as quiet as possible. I'm amazed the people who lived in the house didn't hear us laughing in their shed. Good times. Story 39. I was 14 years old, and my friends and I were smoking marijuana in a public park in my town. It was after the start of the Vigiparates, so there was a redistribution of law enforcement personnel from the capital who arrived in my small town. We were used to the local police leaving us alone as long as we didn't do anything dangerous. However, when the newcomers threatened us, we ran away. I was chased through the streets I knew well by a guy who was more focused on finding his taser on his belt than on where I was going, giving me the chance to lose him by climbing over a large stone wall. I later learned that my friend was tackled to the ground and treated roughly, while the other person with us was tossed. Story 40. My very first time running was on a dirt bike. I got chased down the street, then hit a trail and escaped pretty easily. A few years passed, and I got a street bike and evaded the police around 12 times. I always got away with ease. The closest they got was when they approached me at a gas station. I managed to escape, but during the getaway, my shifter lever broke, and I was stuck in third gear. I pulled down a side street where a kind man was outside watering his grass. He saw me struggling and offered to let me leave my bike in his garage while I called my wife to pick me up. I took him up on that immediately, After taking off my coat, I stashed the bike in his garage as I heard sirens searching for me. At the time, I was working a job where I had brought home a box truck. I called my wife and she came to pick me up with the truck. When she arrived, we lifted the bike into the back of the truck with the liftgate. I strapped it in and drove past 10 police officers who had been searching for me for the last 30 minutes. There was so much luck on my side that day. I could have easily ended up like the street racer who spent a few years in prison. Story 41. Not police officers, but truancy officers with parents, cousins, and siblings of one of the kids who was with me. We got off the bus, met up with two friends, and decided to leave. We went out and broke into some abandoned houses and got some food. We got into a confrontation with someone. They arrived when we were at a crosswalk waiting, and we ran, thinking, "What is this?" We got away without any issues, mainly because they left their vehicle running in the area. About an hour later, one kid's whole family showed up with the officers. At least 4 SUVs were driving down the narrow streets in the neighborhood. Some were trying to surround blocks and cut us off, while we were hopping through alleys, backyards, parking lots, and playgrounds. As a baseball player, my chest hurt more that day than it ever did on the field. In the end, they cornered us in an alley 7 blocks later. The kid's family saved us from truancy but took us back to school, where we were met by principals and security. I received a 3-day suspension, which just allowed me to stay at home. Some days I wonder how my dad didn't lose his temper with me. Story 42. My friend threw a pumpkin through a window in late October. 20 minutes later, a police officer pulled into the convenience store we were walking into. I told him to stay calm. There was no way they had investigated and seen the security footage of us. He took off running. The police chased him and told me to stay put. The moment they were around the corner, I took off in the opposite direction and started jumping fences in a residential neighborhood. Story 43. I was 12 or 13, constantly unsupervised. I took a yard tire to float down the river. I didn't even think about it being illegal until the shouting started. But I was small and agile. I slipped through the bushes and into the woods on the other side of town before going home and staying there all week, just in case. Story 44. I got caught speeding in my car. I tried to hide but didn't take my foot off the brake. I didn't get caught the second time when the police raided a high school party. I escaped with about 5 others. Everyone else, mostly juniors, was rounded up, but only a few got in trouble overall. Story 45. Oh, memory unlocked. I have another one. When I was 8 or 9, my biological parent regained custody of me from the state, but it was tenuous and there were many check-ins. Setting aside her flaws, she struggled with numerous mental health issues that were not her fault. She was extremely paranoid and drank to drown out the voices. She was still a bit intoxicated from the night before and didn't want to open the door for the social worker. They called the police. My mother essentially threw me over a 6-foot fence in the backyard. My pants ripped, and I had a large scratch on my thigh, but otherwise I was fine. This led to a long-standing fear of heights. We hid in the neighbor's basement until they returned home. They were a nice elderly couple who knew my grandfather, as it was his house we were staying in, so they let us stay there until nightfall. Later, we sneaked back, and somehow my mother managed to convince them that she had forgotten the meeting date and that we had been out having a mother-daughter day. Story 46. Hid in a dumpster. They stood about 2 feet away from me and talked about getting away and where we could have gone so fast. Be on the lookout, but they never found us since I'm homeless and know all the good spots. It was for something very minor, but in a situation where they would have tried to lock me up for jaywalking. Story 47. We were protesting the Vietnam War in Washington, D.C. We tried to run, but the tear gas got us. I managed to crawl away with teary eyes and a runny nose. Happy 4th of July. Story 48. I had a Honda F3 in 1996 that I bought new. I lived in northern Wisconsin, and there was a road, County C, that went from Washburn to Cornucopia. I used to push the bike to its limits regularly. It was a nice road with good visibility and very little traffic. One time on the way back, I came around a corner and saw a state trooper coming my way. I eased off the throttle, looked down, and realized I was going 105 miles per hour. I panicked and accelerated again. I crossed the center line several times on the way back but didn't crash. Honestly, I don't know if the trooper turned around because my mirrors were shaking too much. I slowed down to 70 miles per hour over every hill. I would have pulled over if a police officer had been coming my way with their lights on. Luckily, that didn't happen. Story 49. Not me. A roommate of mine went across the street to a house party. About half an hour later, the police showed up with a bus to take away minors. He was caught with the rest of the partygoers. While the police were rounding up more people, he noticed writing on the window that said, "In case of emergency, lift up and push." He thought, well, this is an emergency. So he lifted the handle and kicked out the back window. He ran back to our house, less than a block away, and we watched the police react throughout the neighborhood while he hid in his room. Story 50. Nighttime, driving home in my outer metro suburb, I sped past a hidden police car. I was doing 15 kilometers per hour over the limit and, to my horror, saw in my rearview mirror as they pulled out of their hiding spot. However, they had to give way to another vehicle on the street before they could chase me. At this point, I was 200 meters past them, approaching a spot where the street curved slightly over a bridge. I made a quick decision to turn down a side street and hide for about 30 minutes in the dark, waiting for the police car to crawl down the street with its flashlight on. However, they never appeared. I drove home via back streets and spent the next hour anticipating a knock on the door from the police, but they must not have noted my license plate. I told myself that this would be the first and last time I would succeed in evading the police in this city because I was sure I was going to receive a ticket. Story 51. Oh boy, do I have a story. It was my junior year of high school during testing week. My friends and I were not trying to be trapped in our school's auditorium for the whole day, so we skipped and went across town to the local library and convenience store. My 7 friends and I walked into the store, and like a sane person, I paid for my items as did some of the others. 2 individuals stole some hot dogs and brownies, as one of the employees spotted them putting the items in their pockets. The 2 of them shoved past the employee and ran down the street while the store owner called the police. The other 5 of us had already paid for our stuff, but the owner tried to hold us inside the store. Somehow, we managed to get out and went to the library basketball court. 3 police officers arrived with sirens blaring, and we all stood there looking foolish. The officers were angry and started asking us questions about why we weren't in school and what had happened. We played dumb and said the 2 who stole the items had just come in with us, but we didn't know them. I think the officers were about to call the school but probably changed their minds, so they left to look for the 2 suspects. Later, we somehow made it back into school and found one of the guys. He said he bolted down the street and took the back routes into the school. Those were stupid and reckless times. Story 52. In high school, a party was broken up, and I jumped the fence, where I was attacked by a vicious chihuahua. This next story is not mine but rather a local news story. A man was arrested for evading the police. He got away, but they found his car the following day at his workplace and arrested him there. It was all because he wanted to test a theory that if you're traveling at 100 miles per hour, they would terminate the pursuit. Story 53. I didn't run. They arrested me. They questioned me while I was trying to provoke them by threatening and insulting them, and they ended up beating me until I had a seizure and was nearly dead. They sent me to the hospital because I was severely injured. I should never have done this, but I was in a psychotic state and was not myself. As a result, I experience seizures every 3 to 6 months and have come close to dying multiple times due to this condition. Story 54. We hung out behind a beer store and a pizza shop, drank, and built fires. Every now and then, the police would try to catch us, but we had too many trails and were too fast for them. They would catch someone who was too drunk to run, but I never got caught there. Story 55. I have never run from the police, but the closest I came to that was when I encountered transit security. The MAX in Portland, Oregon, is a public train system similar to a bus but operates on tracks. It features a free rail zone that passengers can use in the most central part of downtown. However, if you ride outside of this free area, you must pay fare. I boarded at the last stop of the free rail zone out of convenience to get me about 8 blocks to the next stop, which was across the street from my destination. I did not pay fare, and there were fare checkers waiting to inspect passengers as they exited. One checker asked me for my fare, but I quickly ran past him because I was not willing to pay a hefty fine for just one stop on the max. I knew they legally could not detain me, so I ducked under his arm and took off as he yelled, "The police are coming!" I thought, I will be long gone before they get here. I got away, but my adrenaline was pumping, and my heart was racing as I usually don't do things like that. I ran to my boyfriend's place and told him about the incident, and he couldn't believe what I had done. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.